Hello, today we're going to be discussing interview skills for pre-professionals, and specifically in this video, we're going to focus on the healthcare professionals who may have to have a CASPer assessment in their future or an MMI slash multiple mini interview in their future. There were two other videos in the series. The first covered preparing for an interview, and the second covered the basics and tips and strategies for the interview day. So if either of those topics interest you, I suggest going back to review one of those. But let's get started with today's topic. The first, CASPer interviews. Now, for many of you, this may be a new thing. So what is CASPer? It is also a friendly ghost, of course, but when we're talking about the CASPer assessment that we may encounter in professional schools, we're talking about a computer-based assessment for sampling personal characteristics. It is yet another test that you're going to be taking along the application route. Now, this is still new. The schools that have adopted this have been doing so only in the last few years, and so we still don't really know how schools are going to be using this CASPer assessment, and it's only been adopted by a few so far. We anticipate more will bring it on board, but it might not be something you have to encounter. It depends what school you apply for. It's when it is required, it's going to be alongside your admissions interviews, your letters of rec, and an essay. This would not be an alternative to interviews. This would be an addition to. The CASPer its aim is to evaluate key personal characteristics, and it's supposed to serve as a reliable measure of traits like your professionalism, ethics, communication, and empathy. As of 2018, 31 allopathic schools were using CASPer. It is a 90-minute test, and there are 12 sections of video and word-based. It is a 90-minute test, and there are 12 sections of video and word-based scenarios. We'll explore that further in just a moment. Each scenario is going to have 3 follow-up questions that must be answered in under 5 minutes. And then there's an optional 15-minute break halfway through, and there are opportunities to take sample tests, and I also have some resources at the end that you can look at. So the sample video question 1, so this would be something you would see in the video, but in essence, one member of your student group, Sue, is showing up unprepared and not contributing. She blames this shortcoming on a paper she had to write, but the other members argue they were responsible for the same paper, yet still managed to show up prepared. 2 other members began confronting Sue about the problem. Question 1. You are a member of the study group and have not participated in the interaction so far, but now the group is looking to you. How would you diffuse this situation? So remember, you'll have 3 follow-up questions to this video after you have the initial response to the first, in which you have 5 minutes. Now, when you're looking at any type of scenario that has multiple viewpoints, you should do some perspective taking. And by that, I mean weigh what it would be like to answer one way versus the other, show the audience that you've considered multiple sides and that you've arrived at your decision only after weighing multiple options. And here we have a sample word-based question. From time to time, we were all faced with conflict in some form. With experience, we learned to deal with different forms of conflict, and here are the 3 questions. Describe a time when you had to deal with conflict and how you coped. How might you handle a similar situation differently should it arise again? And what would be your strategy if you were faced with a conflict that cannot be resolved? And you can see some of this would be similar to what we might have prepared for a behavioral interview, not too different. Some general tips. We talked about the first. So when faced with ethical scenarios, we can also use if-then conditional statements. So if Sue didn't correct her actions over the next few meetings, I would inform the professor about the situation and ask her for his or her guidance. Because of course, we're not going to know a lot of those pieces in the ethical scenarios. There's a lot of absent information. And so if you use conditional statements like if-then, it allows you to still give a direction while still acknowledging that you don't have all the information required. Other tips, be prepared to share some personal stories. So the same brainstorming you do for an interview would be helpful in advance of a CASPer. Focus on the lessons you learn from your story. So it's not merely important that you help someone at a hospice care home, but what did you learn from that care? And then avoid red flags. So try to not tell stories about dealing with anxiety, inability to handle stress, lack of communication skills, those types of things, because that would perhaps be a reason then not to bring you on board for a medical school. So this would be the same type of red flags I would want to avoid in an interview. So that's my bit about CASPer, short but sweet. And of course, I'll have resources at the end too that you can explore on your own. But next, discussing the multiple mini interviews. These are more common. What these are, typically 6 to 8 mini interviews, all with different interviewers. Each interview is conducted by perhaps a member of an admissions team. It might be a faculty, it could be a student or a community member. We don't know. It's going to be someone. More than likely, you'll be given a written vignette discussing a problem or ethical dilemma. Sometimes it's not a vignette. Sometimes it might be a debate that they want you to argue a side on. Sometimes it might be a role-playing situation. Most commonly, it's a written vignette. In these situations, you are given 2 minutes to read and think and plot out your answer. And then it varies from school to school, but you might have 4 to 8 minutes to discuss that situation portrayed in the vignette. And then, of course, each of those 6 to 8 mini interviews will be a different story or a different vignette that they'll ask you to consider. Now, some MMIs might have group problems or as well, in addition to those debates we talked about. Every school is a little bit different. The reason they're having the MMI is because it's meant to reduce bias, because every interviewer is going to evaluate you on a set of criteria specific to that vignette, and they're not going to know how you perform in any other meeting or in any other scenario. And so that allows you actually to have an increased interview, whereas in a more common one-on-one, two-on-one, or even a panel interview, if it doesn't go well with one interview, you've essentially done poor on the entire one. This allows you some failure and allows you some room to skate. Ultimately, those multiple mini interviews are going to evaluate you on different criteria, but it might be social and communication competence, critical thinking, sensitivity, humanism, ethical competence, things like that. This is just an example. This is from the University of Minnesota. Their medical school does do MMIs, or at least they have as of 2019. And they're showing that at the start of the circuit, there's one applicant at each station. The scenarios are not visible to the applicant. Each station deals with a different topic and has a different assessor. And the circuit structure addresses issues of context specificity, halo effect, and reduction of bias. And then also kind of an idea, most of the time it'll be that written discussion vignette, but it could be a collaboration with a group. It could be role playing where you're working with an actor, or it could be a debate that you would have against another applicant. So here's an example of one of the vignette questions. Universities are commonly faced with the complicated task of balancing the educational needs of their students and the costs required to provide learning resources to a large number of individuals. As a result of this tension, there has been much debate regarding the optimal size of classes. One side argues that smaller classes provide a more educationally effective setting for students, while others argue that it makes no difference, so larger classes should be used to minimize the number of instructors required. Discuss your opinion on this issue with the examiner. In this scenario, you would have 2 minutes to write down your tasks, identify if you have a particular stance, what points that you're going to use to support that stance, but similar to the CASPer, I think it's always worthwhile to bring up that you can see the other side, and in fact that often can help you argue your own point. If you can see the elements and I can see where they could argue this point, however, I believe that this is perhaps a weakness of that point, and so I would opt for something separate. But in these two, it's okay to use if-then conditional statements if you're missing some of the information required. And then here, I know it says example 3, the last one instead of example 1 is because I deleted one of the examples. Regardless, in this would be instructions for the applicant. Your apartment garage has assigned parking spots. On leaving your spot, you're observed by the garage attendant as you back into a parked car, a Porsche, knocking out its left front headlight and denting the left front fender. The garage attendant gives you the name and office number of the owner of the Porsche, telling you that he is calling ahead to the car owner, Richard. The garage attendant tells you that Richard is expecting your visit. Enter Richard's office and begin your conversation with him. In this instance, you would still have 2 minutes, so if there's anything you want to jot down, you could, but this is a role-playing situation, so it's going to look a little bit different than the vignette. Now, we have some insight into what the actor's instructions are. You are Richard, and have just been told by the parking garage attendant that your car has been hit while parked in the garage. You are very angry about the damage to your brand new Porsche, which you just bought 4 weeks ago. In addition, you are planning to leave straight from work to pick up your family for the long drive to the beach cottage, but now you will not feel safe driving to the beach after dark. Voice these concerns angrily. Accuse the applicant of being a terrible driver, an incompetent idiot. Raise threats of causing problems with the applicant's insurance company, getting the police involved, and starting legal action. Give the applicant opportunities to calm you down and reason with you, but under no circumstances should you act reassured or comforted. So here we have insight that in one of those role-playing scenarios, you may be in a situation where you can't win, quotation mark, the scenario. There's not going to be an optimal solution, but in fact, they're just going to be evaluating whether you're able to stay calm in the situation. And here we actually do have further assessment considerations for this particular scenario. So the assessor was going to be looking at whether you as an applicant maintained eye contact and listened to Richard, whether the applicant agreed with Richard's concern within limits. Did you acknowledge your error? Did you remain calm in the face of your anger? And did you sympathize with Richard's predicament? So my general tips: synthesize, don't summarize. We don't need you to reiterate what the vignette or the situation is. Instead, analyze the situation and start getting to the lessons learned from the information you have in front of you. Weigh both sides. In advance, review ethical cases. I have some resources at the end of here as well that you can look into. But if you're more aware of what different ethical considerations are, that's going to help you, because it's more than likely you'll receive at least one ethical issue or vignette in an MMI. Take the opportunity for empathy. Show compassion. Sometimes these answers can seem on the surface cold, but if you'd have an opportunity for empathy, take it. Include appropriate caveats. If you find that generally you would think one way, but there's an opportunity to perhaps see another side, take it. Again, avoid red flags like we've been talking about. Show some personality. These can be awkward interviews. It's okay to be a kind of more comfortable version of yourself and roll with the punches. Again, remembering that the way that MMI is designed is you have room to fail a few even of the vignettes or discussions. You're not going to be as good with everyone. You're going to rock some. Let that comfort you as you go through the process. And here are the resources I was referring to. I think perhaps specifically the ethical cases could be interesting. Washington has some really good ones, but also scu.edu has some great ethical cases available for you. There are practice CASPer and MMI tests. You can also practice the MMI with the Career Center. We do mock interviews for MMI. It's probably easier to do that in person, but we can figure out how to do it virtually as well if you're not able to come in. And then there are also some advice that people have on MMI and CASPer that I included here as well. But that's what we have on these topics. If you would like to schedule an appointment, you can do so via Handshake. You can also call us to schedule at 402-280-2722. You can also drop by if you're in Omaha. We have 10 to 15 minute drop-in appointments Monday through Friday, 2 to 4:30. And if you have any questions, please email us at careercenter@creighton.edu. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.